All right, having finished putting your map into your spiral notebook, we have some follow-up questions to address. So let's take a look at those. You're going to go ahead and write these on the next page in your spiral, right next to the map. So right here, right next to the map. Okay, and we'll take them one by one. Now, I will, as I show them, you'll see that I've already written down the questions. So you will not see me writing them all out. So this will go a little bit more quickly than usual. All right, question number 1. Why were the seas that surround Greece important to their empire? So there were the 3 seas that were there. There were the Ionian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Aegean Sea. Okay, all 3 of those that surrounded them, you see them on your map. They made it easy for the Greeks to travel between the city-states. Add an S there. And also provided protection from invaders. And this is in addition, of course, to the obvious of them providing fish for food. Okay. Number 2, looking at ancient Greece's geography, what was one negative feature and why? So we're looking at the negative feature and why. So why was it a negative feature? So lots of things about the geography. We're looking at the mountains, the seas, the fact that there was a whole bunch of teeny tiny little islands that were all spread apart. Okay, so we're looking at one negative feature. Now you can come up with your own ideas about what these negative features could have been. I'm going to give you one possible negative feature. And that is that the waters of the seas and the Rocky Mountains, so I guess it is 2, okay, it's the waters, the seas themselves, and the Rocky Mountains, kept the city-states isolated from one another, which made it difficult to form a single culture or a single united government. So the fact that there were Rocky Mountains meant that it was very rough terrain for them to cross to get from one place to another. And it being very difficult, it was kind of like, why bother? It wasn't impossible, but it was difficult. So it's easier to just stay where you are. And of course, the seas, while it was also possible for them to travel between the city-states because of the seas, and they were shipbuilders, it was a lot easier, again, for them to just stay where they were. And they did form independent cultures. They formed independent governments at first. And if we're going to have negative features, then we're going to have positive features. So what was one positive feature of ancient Greece's geography? Why? And I apologize, I had a spelling mistake, I had to fix it. So this is geography. And why? So why was it positive? So in the same way that the Rocky Mountains and the seas kept the city-states separated from each other, it also kept invaders out. So Greece's Rocky Mountains and surrounding seas formed a natural barrier from outside invaders. So it was very protective. Okay, number 4. What does the Acropolis demonstrate about Greek culture? The Acropolis was those little red marks that you put down by Athens. If you look at your map, those 5 little red pillars. So I apologize, I did have to end up writing up the side to finish the side. So the Acropolis demonstrates that having a protected center of civilization. So where it was, okay, and the way it was built. Okay, it was important to the Greeks. It is where religious, artistic, and economic activities took place. And it also demonstrates that the Greeks had very advanced building skills. So I want you to Google an image of the Acropolis. And what's going to come up at first is going to be an image of what it looks like today. And it's going to be ruins. But when you consider the fact that it is thousands of years old, and you think about the fact that that is what's still standing after thousands of years and going through a whole bunch, we're talking hundreds of earthquakes. That's pretty amazing that it is still standing looking like that. But then see if you can also Google a picture of what the Acropolis would have looked like when it was originally built. And you'll see how amazing it looked. And that's how advanced their building skills were thousands of years ago. Now, question number 5, I want you to write it down, but not answer it yet. Simply because, yes, you've learned where these places are with them being on your map, okay? But you haven't learned anything about them yet, okay? So write the question down, and then you're not going to answer it until you learn about these places, okay? So the question is, would you rather have lived in ancient Athens, Sparta, or Troy, and why? Notice it doesn't ask about Mycenae, all right? And there's a reason for that, and you're going to find out why very soon. Okay, so just Athens, Sparta, or Troy, and why? And this is one that I cannot answer for you. Okay, there's nothing I can do to help you with the actual answer because this is a you question. Okay, would you rather have lived in ancient Athens, Sparta, or Troy? Okay, so don't answer this, not until after you learn about them. Okay? But do write the question down. Okay, now the handouts that I've given you, I want you to cut out, I want you to cut along the solid lines. Okay, cut on all the solid lines. Okay, cut around everything where there's a solid line. Do not cut the dotted lines. Okay, those need to stay attached. You're going to fold on the dotted lines. Okay. And then on the back of the strip here, the title strip, okay, that's where you're going to be gluing down. So this will flip. Okay, these will flip nice and freely. Okay, they will fold and flip. And this is what will hold it down into your notebook. Okay, so cut on all of the pages that I gave you. You're going to cut along the solid lines, whether it's all the way around or if it's in between. Okay, do not cut the dotted lines. Okay, so take a few minutes to do that. And then we're going to answer all the questions underneath the flips. Okay, and you will notice that I do have a little bit of color on this one. And then the other one that has a map, there's also a little bit of color on that one you're going to see. Notice I've only colored Crete here, and I did put a little dot and labeled it. I'll zoom in on it in a little bit. And I did color around the water there. This one doesn't have to be super perfect. Okay, if you get a little bit of flooding on the islands, that's okay. Please don't completely flood them. Okay, the tiny islands. Definitely do not flood the big ones. The mainland. Okay, this is the mainland. These are the islands of the archipelago. Okay, so Arthur Evans was a historian, archaeologist, and he was doing some digging at Knossos on Crete, okay, big island of the Greek archipelago, and he made a marvelous discovery at Knossos. Okay, there's the spelling right there. Okay, and he discovered remains of a palace. And in that palace, there were some rooms, besides just, the regular old rooms that would be in a palace. He also discovered rooms that were used as workshops, where things would be created, like crafts and stuff. And other rooms for storing food, like a pantry type of place. So this would have been pretty advanced for where he was doing his digging. And this was the home of the Minoans. So what do we know about them? Well, we don't know as much as we would like to know about them, of course. So something that we do know about them is they made jewelry, vases, and statues. They existed from 2500 BC to 1450 BC, so a little bit over 1,000 years there. And of course, this is around, okay, so circa. We don't have exact dates, okay? They used wooden ships to trade, right? So from here, if they're using their ships, that means they're going these other places here, okay? And they're also going as far as Egypt and Syria. So Egypt is going to be off the map going this way down to Egypt. Okay, Syria is going to be off the map going over this way. Okay, they traded pottery and stone vases for ivory and metals. And they patrolled the Mediterranean to protect trade, all that trade they were doing from, you see it, pirates. So other peoples out there that were just trying to get the trade goods for free, stealing it. That's what a pirate is. Someone that tries to take something that doesn't belong to them for free and sell it off as their own. Okay. So that's what we do know about them. But what happened to them? Well, historians have not discovered exactly what happened to them. So they did disappear. Okay. And historians haven't discovered exactly how that happened, but they have some ideas. So what some possible causes are, some theories. And those theories include that there was an earthquake that destroyed the civilization, and that Mycenaeans invaded Crete. Okay, that island that they live on. So another group of people, the next group that we're going to learn about, you're going to learn about, came in, invaded, conquered, took over. Okay, so the one for Mycenaean civilization will need to go on a totally different page because it is quite large. Doesn't mean it has a lot of writing, just means it's large in size. Okay, so when and where did the Mycenaeans live? Okay, so here's Crete. This is where they took over, conquered, theoretically, possibly, the Minoans. Again, not for sure. Okay, there's the rest of the area that the Mycenaeans lived in. Okay, and this says Mycenae. So if you just take off that there, that's what it says. Right there, Mycenae. And you already have that on your big map. Okay, so this whole thing. And it is now called Peloponnese. Okay, or would later be called. Okay, all right, so where, we see the where, and when did the Mycenaeans live? So the when is 2000 BC to 1100 BC. That is at least when they were in the Greek islands. It may have been even earlier when they were in Central Asia, but they moved to the mainland, to mainland Greece from Central Asia. So what do we know about Mycenaean culture? We do know a little bit more about them than the Minoans. And everything that we do know about the Minoans and the Mycenaeans does come from paintings. It comes from sculptures. It comes from artwork. Not so much from writing. Most of their stories would have been kept orally. They did have some things written. Of course, they had written records, but not from all the way back in the beginning. Most of their records were records of like legal records, like trade, business documents, marriages, deaths, births, but not so much like stories. most of the stories and histories and things were oral tradition. But what we do know, a lot of it comes from their artwork. So what do we know about their culture? So we know that each king lived in a palace on a hill, and that way he could oversee everything. He could look down on his land, on his villages. Okay, and these palaces had thick stone walls for protection from outside invaders, and for protection even possibly from inside invaders. The nobles lived on large farms outside of the palace walls, and of course those would be not on the hill. Enslaved people, yes, they did have slaves, and other workers lived in villages on the nobles' estates. So on the nobles' farms, they would have been divided up, and the enslaved people lived in the villages that were on the nobles' estates. And the palaces were where government happened. And they had workshops where stuff was created. And what kind of things were created? For that, I needed to write over here. They made clothes. They made jars for olive oil and wine. They made metal swords. And they made leather shields. And we know of those because there's evidence. Examples of these have actually been found. So now what happened to the Mycenaean civilization? So we have those two theories, those two ideas about what happened to the Minoan civilization. And now what about the Mycenaean civilization who might have conquered the Minoans? Well, this is also something that is theoretical, not exactly sure what happened. And some of those theories are that the civilization itself just grew weak and kind of dwindled and kind of went away. That the many kings fought against each other because it grew weak, maybe, or they just fought against each other for power. That there were a lot of earthquakes that destroyed the palaces, because there are a lot of earthquakes in that area, which is why there are so many tiny islands. It's because of the earthquakes. Could have been a combination of all three. Could have been a combination of just two. Could have been just one in general. Could have been none of the above. Could have been something else. Don't know. Either way, they're all questions. At this point, they're theories. Could the Mycenaean civilization have actually been Atlantis? Some people theorize that. Okay, to fit these two on the same page, the best way to do it is to lay this one that says the Greeks down first on this bottom corner, right up with the edge. Okay, so lay that one down first, and then you put this one down in the very top corner up here. Okay, and then when you do so, you're going to see that this little tab is going to overlap a little bit. Okay, and that's going to be okay because your answers are going to end up, it'll go a little bit over that edge, but that'll be okay. All right, and that's the best way to get these two to fit on here. At least that's what I found when I was laying it out. If you can do it another way, go ahead and do it another way. Okay. Okay, so when were the Dark Ages? Now, you may have heard of the Dark Ages in another context, which is in reference to medieval times. Well, that you're going to learn about next year. Okay, these are the obviously Greek Dark Ages, and there are Dark Ages with many civilizations. Um, So, but here we're obviously talking about the Greek Dark Ages. And a Dark Age is just a period of time where some kind of, usually it's like, there's less trade, there's less artistic creation, there's less, the economy is worse. It's just things aren't as strong. Okay, things aren't as they're not looking as great one way or another. Okay, that's what dark ages are. Okay, it doesn't mean the sun's not shining. It doesn't mean the lights don't work. Okay, it just means things aren't going as good. Okay, so when were the dark ages for Greece? Well, these were from 1100 BC to 750 BC. So a relatively short period of time, 250 years, 350 years. So it seems like a long time, but it's actually a relatively short period of time. So what was it that happened during this time that actually made it be called the Dark Ages? So in this case, people left Greece. Trade slowed down and people made fewer things to sell. I mean, of course, there's less trade, so why make more stuff to sell? You're just wasting your time. You're wasting your money with even buying the raw materials that you need to make things. So make just enough that you might be able to sell it. There's no point having stuff just sitting on your shelves if it's not going to sell, right? And it's the same way in the economy at any time. Okay? Farmers only grew enough food for their family, and this is something that's called subsistence farming. This here is a factor of supply and demand. Okay? Demand was down, so supply went down. But if demand was up, well, guess what? Then supply would go up. Make sense? All right. And also, since supply is down and demand is down, people are very poor. There's not a lot of trade going. People are poor. That's what happens. The economy sucks. You could call it a recession. You could call it a depression. This one was the Dark Ages. Started with a recession. But at some point that had to end. Okay? It either ends with the entire civilization crumbling or with it crawling out of it. And in this case, The Dark Ages ended with them crawling out of it. But how? Well, trade began to increase. When trade began to increase, many people returned to the Greek mainland. Could have been the other way around. People began to return to the Greek mainland, and then trade began to increase. Okay? And when people came to the Greek mainland, they brought new ideas, new crafts, new skills, new things to be traded, new things to be made. So the economy got better. And then small communities that were ruled by kings farmed instead of farmers on estates owned by nobles, as it had been. Now we're going to have small farming communities, and each one of these farming communities is ruled by a king. So there's no more subsistence farming. They're farming for their entire community. So how did the Greeks live? What was their life like? Now, of course, there's going to be a whole lot more to this than just what you're going to see under this little slip of paper here. So this is just going to be a glimpse into how the Greeks lived. Okay? So how did the Greeks live? They lived in small communities ruled by kings. So these were the people who had returned to the Greek mainland, set up those new farming communities, okay, that were ruled by kings. This is them. Okay, and these communities were independent. So what kind of jobs did they do? Obviously, not everybody's going to be a farmer. Okay, we learned that from the early Stone Age people, okay, when they stopped being nomadic and they settled down in their first, villages. Not everybody was going to farm anymore. They started doing job specialization, right? And they started having, craftspeople and, artisans, making baskets, and some making shoes, some making weapons, and some making pottery, right? And so you can't have everybody doing the same job. Nothing gets done except for that one job. So what did the Greeks do? Some of the most important things, of course, farming, also shipbuilding, so they could continue with moving around those separate islands and trading with each other and with outside peoples using their ships, trading the things that they farmed, and of course trading the things that they made. So nothing stays the same forever, including Greek culture, any culture. One thing that has stayed the same with Greek culture is its alphabet. That has stayed the same, relatively the same, slight little changes, variations in shapes and stuff. Its alphabet and its language has stayed roughly the same for thousands of years. But how did its culture change over time? Well, speaking of its alphabet, as trade increased, they adopted an alphabet. from the Phoenicians to record their trade. So they had something that they had been using to record trade. But then they adopted an alphabet. And that is the alphabet that they use today. We call it the Greek alphabet. Well, no, it actually wasn't. It was the Phoenician alphabet. They adopted it as their own. And then bards, which are basically storytellers, began writing down the old stories instead of using oral storytelling, also known as oral tradition, to keep the stories going. So oral tradition, oral storytelling is like playing grapevine. Okay? It changes. The more it's told, the story changes. Okay, so you have two little cards that look kind of like this. All right, so we're going to start with this one. I've just got this in the upper corner here, and you'll see where the next one goes. Okay, so first question, how would having a group of nobles rule a city-state be different from having a king rule? Notice it doesn't say better, it says different. Okay, so it does not imply that having nobles rule is better or having a king is better. Just says different. Okay. So how would it be different? Well, first of all, a king would make all the rules or laws alone, all by himself. This we're talking about is for a city-state. All right, doesn't mean modern times. We're talking about ancient times here. On the other hand, a group of nobles would have to discuss and agree on the laws. They couldn't have just one of them doing the same thing as a king. No, they would have to get together. They'd have to discuss it, debate, come to some kind of agreement, work out the details, and have some give and take. Problem with nobles ruling would be that they would more than likely make laws that would benefit mainly their own social class, so the nobility. Okay, and nobles, in case you forgot or are unsure, they're the wealthy. Okay. A king may or may not, but still would be more likely to consider the needs of his people when making laws. Now, why would he be more likely to consider the needs of his people? Because he is in charge of everybody. He's responsible for everybody. And if he is not taking care of everybody, he faces the possibility of rebellion, of revolt. Okay? Were there some kings that did not consider their people? Absolutely. But most kings, most rulers, did consider the needs of their people. So now you can see where I put the other one, especially in relation to the one up above it. Okay, so it's kind of step down diagonal from the other one. Okay, so our essential question here is, how does movement affect cultures? And what happens when cultures interact? So when they connect with each other, when they run into each other. Okay? And then we need to support this with specific examples, and I'm going to. You can kind of already see kind of a hint down there. Get rid of that hint. I don't want you starting to write it down yet. Okay? All right. So, first and foremost, cultures learn from each other. Okay? They learn ideas about food, clothing, music, religion, economics, all sorts of different things. Okay, so one specific example was the Mycenaeans, and they adopted parts of the Minoan culture. That's where they learned things about shipbuilding, using the sun and the stars for navigation, using bronze, worshiping the Earth Mother as their chief god. And that's where we get the notion of Mother Earth. Okay, the same way, not necessarily, maybe a little bit, but not necessarily. Same kind of concept, yes. Another example, here's that little sneak peek you got. The Greeks adopting the Phoenician alphabet. They saw something they liked, they adopted it, and they stuck with it. And some of it has become part of our lingo, I guess you could say. Okay, alpha, beta, right? Not only do we say those words, but we write their symbols down. Okay? Did you even know that alpha and beta are actually Greek letters, which were Phoenician letters? Cultures exchange goods with one another, so actual physical things, okay, through trade. Specific example, the Minoans traded for goods with Egypt and Syria. Okay, ivory was one of the things that they traded. Okay, that's what they got. They got ivory. What did they trade out? They traded out pottery and stone. Okay, they got ivory and they got metal. And then finally, groups or whole civilizations. So it could be smaller groups or it could be whole civilizations. They conquer others. So the more powerful one will conquer the less powerful one. And then they expand their territory. And I bet you can guess where I'm going with this one. I hope you can. The Mycenaeans, who were originally from Central Asia, may have, again, this is a may have, conquered Crete and the Minoans. But either way, we look at that map and we see how much territory they had in Greece, on the islands, on the mainland. And where were they from originally? Central Asia. Okay. All right, and that will do us for today. We will continue with these flip notes another time. And yes, color is good.